I still remember that morning. The sky was the color of ash, heavy, unmoving, as if even the clouds refused to look down on me. And as I stood outside that courtroom, hands trembling, breath unsteady, the only thought running through my mind was, how did my life end up here? When I walked in, the judge looked up from his papers, stared at me for a long, stunned moment, and whispered under his breath, "Why are you here?" That question still echoes in my heart, not because I didn't know the answer, but because for the first time in years, someone saw me, not as a villain, not as a failure, just a woman who didn't belong in a place where love had turned into a legal war. Before I tell you what happened inside that room, I want you to take a deep breath. This is not an easy story to tell, but it's one I promised myself I'd share. For every woman who ever forgot her worth, for every heart that was broken quietly. If you've ever been silenced, stay till the end. Because what I learned changed everything. And before we go deeper, please like, subscribe, and stay with me through this journey. You might just find a piece of yourself here. Now, let's go back to where it all began. He wasn't always like that. In the beginning, he was kind. Or maybe I just wanted him to be. We met at a friend's wedding. He had this calm confidence, the kind of man who didn't need to say much to be noticed. He smiled at me once, and that was enough. Isn't it strange how sometimes a single moment can decide the rest of your life? We fell fast. He said all the right words, touched me like I was something fragile and precious. I believed him when he said I was different. I believed him when he said, "You'll never have to fight for love with me." If only promises could hold their shape. The first time I saw him angry, it was small, almost unnoticeable. I had laughed too loudly at something his friend said. He pulled me aside and whispered, "You don't have to draw attention like that." It was soft, almost protective, but something in his eyes told me it wasn't love. It was control, and I ignored it. We got married within a year, a quiet ceremony. Just family, a few friends, and a heart that still believed in forever. The first few months were gentle. He'd bring me coffee in bed, tell me how lucky he felt. He'd kiss my forehead before leaving for work. I used to stand by the window, watching him drive away, whispering, "I hope I make you proud." But pride doesn't survive where ego lives. And somewhere along the way, he started to change. It began with silence, the kind that lingers between two people until it starts to rot everything soft. He stopped noticing me, stopped asking how my day was, stopped laughing at my small jokes. I'd cook his favorite meals. He'd eat quietly, then leave the table without a word. Sometimes he wouldn't even come home until midnight, and when I'd ask where he was, he'd say, "Don't start, not tonight." It's strange how love disappears. Not in one big storm, but in small unspoken droughts. Then came the first real fight. I found messages on his phone. Her name was Sarah, the kind of woman who said good morning with a smiley face and "miss you" like it meant something casual. When I asked, he laughed. He said I was being dramatic. He said, "You're imagining things. Maybe motherhood is making you paranoid." Motherhood. Yes. By then, I had given birth to our son, Adam. He was just 2. His little hands, his tiny voice. They were my reason to breathe when the house started to feel like a stranger's home. I tried to stay for him. I told myself, every marriage has phases. But this wasn't a phase. This was a quiet kind of breaking. The kind you don't even realize until you're too tired to fight back. He started sleeping in the guest room. He stopped wearing his wedding ring. And one day, when I confronted him again, he said it. Those words that killed something in me. "I don't love you anymore." He said it with no emotion, like reading a weather report, just a fact, something unchangeable. I remember sitting on the floor that night after he left. The house was dark, Adam asleep in his room, and I just cried until my body gave up. Not because he stopped loving me, but because I had stopped loving myself, trying to keep him. Weeks later, he moved out. And just when I thought I could finally start to rebuild myself, the papers came. Custody. Wanted full custody of Adam. Said I was unfit. Said I was unstable. said I was emotionally incapable of raising a child. I still remember holding that paper, my hands shaking. The same man who once promised to protect me was now using every word, every weakness, every scar against me. When the day of the hearing came, I didn't sleep. I sat on the bed all night, staring at Adam's toys, his tiny shoes by the door, the crayon marks on the wall, the blanket he wouldn't sleep without. I whispered, "I'll fight for you, even if it kills me." And that's how I ended up there, in that courtroom, standing before a judge who looked at me with something like disbelief. Maybe he had seen my name before. Maybe he remembered me from the charity work I used to do, the woman who once helped others find hope. And now, I was the one begging for it. My husband's lawyer stood up first, a man in a navy suit, sharp voice, confident lies. He painted me as emotional, as erratic, as a mother who couldn't control her temper. He used my pain like evidence. Every tear, every tremor in my voice turned into proof that I was unfit. I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I just sat there, silent, composed, because I knew they were waiting for me to fall apart. And then it was my turn. My lawyer asked me one question. "Why are you here?" I looked up, and suddenly the courtroom faded. All I could see was Adam's face, his little smile, his small hands reaching for me every morning. "I'm here," I said softly, "because he's my son, because I've loved him every single day, even when I couldn't love myself. And because no one, not even the man who broke me, can take that away." The room went silent. Even the judge looked away, his eyes softening. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw something shift. That was the first day I realized my voice had power. It didn't end there. Custody battles don't end in a day, but something inside me changed after that. I stopped seeing myself as a victim. I stopped begging for understanding. And I started fighting, not with anger, but with strength. I went back to work. I started small, helping at a women's shelter, then taking on freelance projects. Every time I felt like giving up, I'd remember the judge's eyes when he asked that question, "Why are you here?" And every time the answer grew stronger. Because I deserved to be. Months passed. He tried to intimidate me, manipulate me, even charm me again. But I had learned the hardest truth. You can't save someone who enjoys watching you drown. The final hearing came on a rainy Thursday. He looked tired. Maybe guilt had finally found him. When the judge announced joint custody, he didn't look at me. He just lowered his head. Afterwards, as I was leaving, he stopped me in the hallway. He said quietly, "You look different." I smiled. "I am." He asked if we could talk someday. I told him maybe. But deep down I knew. I didn't need his apology anymore. The peace I had built didn't depend on his regret. That night, I tucked Adam into bed. He looked up at me and said, "Mommy, are you happy now?" I kissed his forehead and whispered, "Yes," because I finally remembered who I am. And that's where the story really begins. Not in court, not in heartbreak, but in the quiet strength that comes after everything falls apart. Because sometimes you have to lose everything to meet yourself again. Healing is not beautiful in the beginning. It's messy. It's loud inside your own head, even when the world around you is quiet. After the court case, I used to wake up every night at 3 a.m. The silence would feel too heavy. The bed too big. I would walk into Adam's room, watch him sleep, and whisper the same words over and over. "You're safe now. You're safe." Maybe I was saying it for him. Maybe I was saying it for myself. I had spent so many years being someone's wife that I had forgotten what it meant to be myself. It's strange how a name on a marriage certificate can erase the one you were born with. For months, I tried to fill the emptiness with distractions. Cleaning, working, pretending to be busy. But grief has a way of finding you in the smallest moments. Like when I'd pour 2 cups of coffee without realizing I only needed 1. Or when a song came on the radio that we used to dance to. And I'd rush to turn it off before the memories started breathing again. One evening, my friend Layla came over. She looked at me, really looked, and said, "You're surviving, but you're not living." I smiled faintly, pretending I didn't understand. But I did. I understood too well. She invited me to a small art exhibition that weekend. I almost said no. I didn't feel ready to exist in public again. But something in her voice made me say yes. And that single choice changed everything. The gallery was filled with soft light, slow music, and people who seemed to belong to another world. One untouched by pain. As I walked through, I stopped in front of a painting. It was just a woman standing in the rain, holding her broken umbrella, but there was something about her face. Calm, resilient, peaceful in her solitude. The title read, "Still Standing." I don't know why, but tears filled my eyes. Maybe because I saw myself in her, broken, drenched, but still standing. That night after I came home, I found myself pulling out my old sketchbook. I hadn't drawn in years, not since before the marriage. Before I started losing pieces of myself to someone else's expectations. I sat on the floor, pencil trembling in my hand, and I started to draw again. Lines turned into shapes. Shapes turned into feelings. And for the first time in so long, I felt alive. Art became my therapy, my silent scream, my soft rebellion. I began posting small sketches online. Simple things. A mother holding her child. A woman looking out the window. A cup of coffee beside an unfinished letter. Each one carried a story, though I never explained them. People started to connect with them. Women from around the world would message me, saying, "I felt that." Slowly, the account grew. And for the first time, I wasn't defined by what I had lost, but by what I was creating. He noticed. Of course he did. One day, he texted me after almost 6 months of silence. "I saw your art page. You're really good." I stared at the message for a long time. So simple, so casual. Like he hadn't been the reason I stopped drawing in the first place. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to. Weeks passed. My small art account turned into a platform. People started ordering prints. Then someone offered to host a small exhibition. My own. The night of the exhibition, I wore a white dress. Simple, soft, free. As I walked into the hall, I saw familiar faces, friends, strangers, and then him. He was standing in the corner, half hidden, watching me. For a second, my heart faltered. Old instincts de-heart, but then I remembered everything. The courtroom, the silence, the tears, and I just smiled politely. When he approached me, his voice was careful. "You've changed," he said. I met his eyes and replied softly, "No. I just came back to who I was before you made me forget." He didn't know what to say. And in that silence, I felt a quiet victory. Not the kind that screams, but the kind that hums gently inside your soul. That night, I stood in front of my favorite painting, one I had titled Unshaken. It was of a woman holding her son, standing in front of a storm. People asked me what it meant. I smiled and said, "It's about learning that peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the strength to hold yourself through it." As the exhibition ended, I felt a stillness I hadn't felt in years. The kind that comes when you finally let go of needing anyone's validation. A few weeks later, he asked if he could take Adam out for a weekend trip. I said yes, because forgiveness, I had learned, wasn't about letting someone back in. It was about setting yourself free from the anger that kept you bound to them. When he came to pick Adam up, he lingered by the door. He looked around, the home, the art, the quiet peace that lived there now. He said softly, "You built a beautiful life," I smiled. "Yes, without you," he nodded. And for the first time, I saw regret in his eyes. Not for losing me, but for realizing he never truly saw me when he had the chance. After they left, I stood by the window, watching their car disappear into the distance. I felt no bitterness, no ache, just gratitude. Gratitude for the heartbreak that forced me to rebuild. Gratitude for the silence that taught me to listen to myself. People think revenge is loud, that it's about proving someone wrong. But the most poetic revenge is peace, the kind that needs no witness. That night, I took Adam's hand as we prayed before bed. He whispered, "Mommy, why do you smile so much now?" I said, "Because I finally learned that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. He nodded sleepily and said, "Then I'll always love you gently." And right then, in that small, perfect moment, I realized my story wasn't about loss. It was about returning home to myself. Time softens everything, even the memories that once burned. It had been almost 2 years since that courtroom day. 2 years since I heard those words that used to echo through my bones. 2 years since I'd walked away, holding my son's hand, promising myself that no matter how broken I was, I'd never let that pain define him. Life had changed quietly, like dawn creeping in through the curtains. Adam had grown taller, stronger. He laughed more now. His eyes no longer searched rooms for tension. I had grown too. Not in the loud, triumphant way people expect healing to look, but in the soft, invisible ways that only the soul understands. I started teaching art at a local community center. At first it was just a small thing, a few kids, a few colors. But watching them draw, seeing their stories unfold through shades and lines, healed something inside me that words never could. Sometimes, I'd see mothers sitting at the back, tired, quiet, holding coffee cups that had long gone cold. They'd smile shyly when our eyes met, and I'd see myself in them. Women who'd lost too much but still showed up every morning, choosing love anyway. One afternoon, after class, I found Adam sitting alone with his sketchbook. He had drawn a picture of our old house, the one we had left behind. But in the corner, he had added a little figure of me, holding his hand, walking away. He looked up at me and said, "Mom, that day when we left, were you scared?" I smiled softly and said, "Yes, but I was also brave." He nodded, thoughtful, and whispered, "I think I was too." That night I realized my son didn't just inherit my pain. He inherited my courage too. Months passed, and life began to feel ordinary, beautifully, mercifully ordinary. I started planting flowers in the small garden outside our home. Each seed felt like a promise that even after the coldest winter, something can still bloom. Then, one morning, I received an invitation. A friend of mine was hosting a charity gala for women who had rebuilt their lives after hardship. They wanted me to speak. I hesitated at first. Public speaking was never something I loved, but then I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who had no voice. Maybe it was time to give her one. The night of the gala, the air was cool, filled with music and murmurs of laughter. As I stood on stage, looking at the faces in front of me, I took a deep breath and began. "I once thought my story ended in a courtroom," I said, "but it didn't. It began there." I spoke about pain, not as something to be ashamed of, but as a teacher. About how losing everything sometimes brings you back to yourself. About how silence, though cruel, can be the birthplace of strength. When I finished, the audience stood and applauded softly, not loud, not rushed, but with that kind of quiet respect that fills the air like a blessing. As I stepped down, someone approached me from the crowd. It was him. He looked older, tired. Not in the way that age makes you tired, but in the way regret does. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, eyes glistening with something I couldn't name. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "I heard your speech. I never knew you were that strong." I smiled faintly and replied, "I wasn't. I became." He looked down, his voice trembling. "I made everything harder for you. I thought I was protecting Adam, but I was just protecting my pride." I didn't answer. Some silences are too sacred to fill. After a long pause, he said, "You were always the better parent." I shook my head softly. There are no better parents, only the ones who try to love better after failing. He nodded, eyes wet. Then he left quietly, disappearing into the crowd. And for the first time, I didn't feel bitterness or victory, just peace. When I returned home that night, Adam was asleep on the couch, a book half open beside him. I sat next to him, brushed his hair back, and whispered, "You're my greatest masterpiece." He stirred a little, smiled in his sleep, and mumbled, "You too, Mom." I looked around our small home, The sketches on the wall, the soft light spilling through the curtains, the quiet hum of a life rebuilt, and I realized I had everything I once prayed for. It didn't look the same, it didn't sound the same, but it felt right. Weeks later, I walked into the courthouse again. Not as a broken woman this time, but as a guest speaker for a workshop about resilience. When the judge saw me, he smiled and said, "I remember you." I smiled back. I remember me too. And in that moment, the story that once began in pain ended in peace. Not the kind of peace that's loud and triumphant, but the kind that's soft, steady, and sure. Because healing isn't about proving the world wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you can still love, even after everything. As I walked out of the courthouse, sunlight hit my face. The same place that once broke me now felt like a symbol of rebirth. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered to myself, I made it. And for the first time in my life, I believed it.